We are asking a question that I think it haunts a lot of us, usually at 3 a.m. when we're doom-scrolling. Is the world just a ruthless competition?
The old dog-eat-dog theory.
Exactly. Is society actually designed so that only the strong survive and, everyone else is just collateral damage? We hear terms like meritocracy thrown around all the time.
Constantly. In corporate emails, political speeches.
But when you look closely, does meritocracy sometimes feel like, a polite cover story for cruelty?
It's the fundamental tension of our time. You see it everywhere. It's this clash between the idea of survival of the fittest and the push for social justice or equity.
And to get to the bottom of this, we have a really fascinating stack of sources today. We're going to look at the dark history of social Darwinism through a breakdown from Sadvipra's movement.
And then we're going to pivot to something very current.
Right? A real-time case study from India, looking at protests over university guidelines with analysis from the federal and the political scientist Yogendra Yadav.
And that case study is so crucial because it takes these high-level theories and shows you what happens when they hit the real world, specifically with government policy and who gets to go to college.
But we aren't just going to leave you with the gloom and doom. We also have a source called Prout that offers a futuristic economic framework that claims to solve this whole tension.
It's a mission, really, to decode why we fear equity, expose the bad science used to justify that fear, and see if there's an alternative where, and I love this phrase, job seek people.
Job seek people. I want to live in that world.
Yeah.
But okay, before we get there, we have to start with the villain of the story, or at least the concept everyone blames. Social Darwinism.
Right. And here's where the story gets twisted immediately. If you hopped in a time machine, went back to 1880, and asked a wealthy industrialist about his social Darwinism, he would just stare at you blankly.
Because the term didn't exist yet.
Not really. It was a retroactive label that critics applied way later, like in the 1940s. But the bigger shock is that the man whose name is on the door, Charles Darwin, had almost nothing to do with it.
This was the first thing in the notes that stopped me. We associate survival of the fittest with Darwin. That's his catchphrase. But you're saying on the origin of species, he barely mentions humans.
He was incredibly cautious. You have to remember, Victorian England was very religious. So in this massive book about beetles and barnacles and finches, Darwin wrote exactly one sentence about us. He said, "Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history."
That's it. One sentence.
That is it. He knew applying his animal theories to human society was a complete minefield.
Okay, so if Darwin didn't turn survival of the fittest into a social policy, who did? Who's the real architect of this jungle mindset we're still fighting today?
That would be Herbert Spencer. He was a philosopher, a sociologist, and actually he's the one who coined the phrase survival of the fittest.
Oh, so it wasn't even Darwin's phrase originally?
Oh, nope. Darwin borrowed it later for the 5th edition of his book. Spencer is the one who looked at the Industrial Revolution, the massive wealth and the just crushing poverty, and he didn't see a tragedy.
What did he see?
He saw evolution in action. He thought this whole social ladder was just nature weeding out the weak.
But wait, this is where the science completely falls apart, right? Because Spencer wasn't using modern genetics. He had no idea about DNA.
No, and this is the fatal flaw in the whole ideology. Spencer believed in Lamarckian evolution.
Okay, help us out here. I remember Lamarck from high school biology, but refresh my memory. What's the difference between Darwinian and Lamarckian?
So Darwin is all about random mutations over millions of years. Lamarckian evolution is the idea that traits you learn or acquire can be passed down to your kids.
Like the classic example of the giraffe stretching its neck.
Exactly. If a giraffe stretches its neck to reach high leaves, Lamarck thought its baby would be born with a longer neck. Or if a blacksmith gets huge muscles, his son would be born with huge muscles.
Okay, that sounds harmless enough when you're talking about giraffes, but Spencer applied this to character.
And that is where it gets so dangerous. He thought that traits like morality, frugality, hard work, or on the flip side, laziness and vice, were genetically passed down.
So if a person was poor,
Spencer didn't think it was because wages were low or they got sick. He thought they were biologically defective in their character.
And following that logic, if they're biologically defective, they'll just pass that on to their children.
Precisely. So for him, poverty wasn't an economic condition to be fixed. It was a genetic disease to be contained. And that led Spencer to argue against any kind of public aid.
Anytime.
He believed if you help the poor, you are polluting the gene pool. You're keeping the unfit alive when nature, in his view, intended for them to fail.
That is chilling.
Yeah.
It completely removes empathy from the equation, and it replaces it with this cold, pseudoscientific duty to let people suffer.
It frames cruelty as a moral virtue.
And this idea didn't just stay in England.
No, it crossed the Atlantic and found a massive fan base in the United States, particularly with a Yale professor named William Graham Sumner.
Sumner. The source had a quote from him that felt like a real punch in the gut.
Before the tribunal of nature, a man has no more right to life than a rattlesnake.
A rattlesnake. It's
Yeah.
not about stripping away human rights. But he had a specific way of breaking this down, didn't he? He talked about two different kinds of struggles.
Yes, and this is critical to understanding the whole meritocracy trap. Sumner argued there's the struggle for existence, which is man against nature, fighting the cold, finding food. He said, this is good, this drives invention.
Okay, that makes sense. We build houses to survive the winter.
But then he introduced the competition for life. This is man against man. He believed that for civilization to advance, we must compete against each other for scarce resources. If you remove that competition, you remove the incentive to be fit.
He also came up with a concept that I feel like politicians still use today, even if they don't use his exact words: the forgotten man.
Oh, absolutely. Now, when we hear the forgotten man today, you probably think of the poor guy, the blue-collar worker left behind.
Right. The person at the bottom, the underdog.
But Sumner meant the exact opposite. For him, the forgotten man was the middle-class taxpayer. He had this whole formula with person A, B, C, and X.
Okay, walk us through the alphabet here.
In Sumner's view, person A and person B are the social reformers, the politicians, the activists. They see person X, the poor person, the unfit one. And A and B want to help X.
Which sounds like a good thing.
Not to Sumner, because A and B don't use their own money. They pass a law that forces person C, the quiet, productive, middle-class worker, to pay for it.
So he framed social welfare as a kind of theft from the productive to support the biological failures.
Correct. He argued society was punishing the fittest person C to prop up the unfit. He saw person C as the true victim of social justice.
That sounds terrifyingly modern. It's basically the argument against the welfare state we hear on cable news every night. But this intellectual framework, it eventually morphed into something much, much darker. We have to talk about Francis Galton and eugenics.
This is the pivot from economics to biology. Galton, who is actually Darwin's cousin, basically thought, if we can breed better pigeons and horses, why can't we breed better humans?
And this idea just exploded in the U.S. It wasn't some fringe thing.
No, it was considered progressive science at the time.
The source described these fitter family contests at county fairs. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. You're talking about human stock pavilions right next to the prize-winning cows.
Yes. Picture it. A county fair in Kansas in 1920. You've got prize pumpkins, prize pigs, and prize families. Doctors would measure their heads, check their teeth, and award blue ribbons to the fittest white families. It was about normalizing the idea that some bloodlines are just better.
It's treating people like livestock. But the flip side of winning a ribbon wasn't so nice. It was sterilization.
That's the dark legacy. The U.S. passed forced sterilization laws in 32 states. Over 64,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized against their will. We're talking about immigrants, the poor, people labeled feeble-minded.
And the source mentions that a certain dictator in Germany was taking notes.
Hitler specifically studied American sterilization laws. He told his inner circle that the U.S. was making progress in maintaining the purity of the race. The Nazis took that American blueprint and just drove it to its genocidal conclusion.
So after World War II, when the world saw the Holocaust, this science obviously collapsed. But the mindset didn't really go away.
The label disappeared. The mindset just went underground. And this brings us to a fascinating study from PLS1 in 2021. They profiled people who still believe in this competitive jungle theory today.
This is the part that really surprised me. You'd think the people who believe only the strong survive would be these super confident alpha types. You know, I'm the lion, you're the sheep.
But the data says the opposite. It's a total paradox. Yes, these individuals often display what are called dark triad traits. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy. They see life as a zero-sum game. But the study found they also tend to have very low self-esteem and fearful attachment styles.
So the whole tough guy act is actually a defense mechanism.
Exactly. It's armor. If you are deeply insecure and terrified that you aren't good enough, it is psychologically safer to believe the world is just a cruel, ruthless place. Because if the world is a jungle, your hostility isn't you being mean, It's just survival. It justifies your own behavior.
That connects so well to what the expert in the source called the naturalistic fallacy. Can you unpack that for us?
It's the is-ought problem. Just because nature is cruel, it has parasites, starvation, animals eating each other, that doesn't mean society ought to be that way. We invented medicine and air conditioning specifically to rebel against nature's cruelty.
Right. We don't say, well, cancer is natural, so we should just let it happen.
Exactly. Civilization is a rebellion against the jungle, not a celebration of it.
Okay, so let's take this theoretical framework and see how it plays out in a real-world policy debate. We're going to look at the recent protests in India regarding the University Grants Commission, or UGC.
This is a perfect modern case study. To give some context, the Supreme Court of India mandated that universities needed better mechanisms to prevent discrimination against marginalized groups, specifically scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes.
So these are groups that have faced historical oppression, basically new affirmative action protections mandated by the highest court. But when the UGC released the guidelines, there was a massive outcry.
Right, and our source, the political scientist Yogendra Yadav, points out something incredibly ironic about who is protesting.
This is where it gets into what you called 4D chess.
Yes. Yadav notes that the protests were largely coming from the ideological supporters of the current government, but the government itself released the guidelines. So you have the regime's base attacking the regime's own rules.
Yadav calls this manufactured dissent. Why would a government want its own supporters to protest its own policy? That seems counterintuitive.
It does, until you look at the motivation. The government never really wanted to implement these rules. Remember, the Supreme Court forced them to. So Yadav argues they released the rules, but simultaneously encourage, or at least allowed, their base to create this huge uproar.
I see. So if there's enough chaos, the government can turn to the Supreme Court and say, look, we tried, but the public is too angry. We have to dilute the rules.
Exactly. It creates a permission structure to back down. And the rhetoric from the protesters is pure social Darwinism anxiety. They are largely from the general category, or upper castes, and they're claiming that they will now be discriminated against.
It's weaponizing the victimhood of the privileged.
Yadav draws a powerful analogy. He compares it to the rhetoric of white supremacy in the U.S., where white groups claim they are being replaced by civil rights laws. Or patriarchy, where men claim anti-rape laws are biased against men.
It's that fear again, the fear that equality feels like oppression to those who are used to having privilege.
And the reality of the rules, as Yadav points out, shows that this fear is totally baseless. The new 2026 guidelines are actually weaker than the previous 2012 rules.
How so? If people are protesting them, I just assumed they were stricter.
Quite the opposite. The 2012 regulations were very specific. They listed things like unfair marking in exams or caste-based segregation as discrimination. The new 2026 rules removed those specific examples. They're much vaguer.
So they're harder to enforce.
Much harder. They do add an ombudsperson for oversight, but without clear definitions, what can that person do? So despite the rules being diluted, the jungle mindset still kicks in, that fear that if they rise, I must fall.
It's that zero-sum thinking we saw in the psychology study. The belief that resources are so scarce that any help given to someone else is a threat to you.
It's person C all over again.
So we have this manufactured outrage preventing real equity. It feels bleak. But we promised an optimistic alternative. We don't have to live in the jungle.
We don't. And history offers another perspective from nature itself. While Spencer was seeing competition, another thinker, Peter Kropotkin, the anarchist prince, was looking at the same nature and seeing something totally different.
Mutual aid.
Yes. Kropotkin observed animals in the harsh conditions of Siberia. He noticed that the species who survived best weren't the ones fighting each other, they were the ones who cooperated.
Like bees or herds of deer.
Exactly. He argued that cooperation, not competition, is the true evolutionary advantage.
I love that. The lone wolf actually dies. The pack survives. So how do we translate mutual aid into a modern economic system? This brings us to the Prout source.
Right. Prout stands for Progressive Utilization Theory. The vision is a society where economic security is guaranteed. The economy is designed to ensure everyone is employed because human potential is seen as the most valuable resource.
But they also tackle the controversial topic of reservations or quotas. This is usually where the whole fight about merit explodes.
They do, but with a really interesting nuance. They argue that reservations are a temporary necessity only until the country is poverty-free, but they propose a progressive hierarchy for how these opportunities should be distributed.
This was really specific, and I want to make sure we get this right. Who gets priority in their system?
Okay, so imagine a ladder of priority for jobs or university seats. They mix social history with economic reality. Priority number 1, poor people from historically marginalized or backward families.
That makes sense. They face the double burden of caste and poverty.
Priority number 2, poor people from non-backward families.
Wait, hold on. So a poor person from a general or upper caste comes before a rich person from a backward caste.
Exactly. That's where they flip the script. Priority number 3 is non-poor people from backward families. And finally, priority 4 is non-poor people from non-backward families.
So economic condition is a huge factor here.
It's the deciding factor for that top tier. They argue that a wealthy person from a low caste doesn't need that reservation nearly as much as a destitute person from a high caste. It tries to merge social justice with economic reality.
It effectively says, let's lift the most vulnerable first, regardless of label, while still acknowledging that historical disadvantage is real. It takes some of the us versus them sting out of it.
It's a vision of cooperation, not that zero-sum rattlesnake tribunal that Sumner talked about.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes the whole psychological game. If you build a society based on Prout's idea, where basic economic security is guaranteed, you actually dismantle the trigger for social Darwinism.
Because if I'm not terrified of starving or losing my status, I don't need to view my neighbor as a threat. The jungle mindset is a response to scarcity and insecurity. If you remove the insecurity, the need for that dark triad armor just falls away.
It redefines what it means to be fit. It's not about who can hoard the most. It's about who can contribute the most to the collective well-being.
And that's the Proutist vision. Moving from survival of the fittest to progress for all. It sounds idealistic, sure, but remember, Kropotkin showed us it's actually how nature works when it's successful.
So, what does this all mean for us? We started with the Victorians misinterpreting biology to justify sweatshops. We saw how that evolved into a psychological defense for insecure people today. We saw how it's being cynically used in Indian politics to block equity. But we also saw that it's a choice.
That is the key. The jungle is a choice. We are not biologically mandated to be cruel. We have the capacity for Kropotkin's mutual aid. We have the intelligence to design systems like Prout where jobs seek people.
It really makes you think. When you hear someone shouting about meritocracy or complaining that the world is getting too soft, are you hearing strength or are you hearing fear?
And that raises the most important question. Are we brave enough to stop fighting this competition for life and start building a civilization that actually acts like one?
A huge thank you to our sources today. Sadvipra's movement, the Federal, and Prout Kranti for helping us navigate this complex terrain.